The failure to act with sufficient ambition to avert the climate catastrophe would be the greatest moral failure of our time.
Making changes takes courage, and if we don't change things, we won't have a future.
I'm an environmentalist. A lot of people don't understand that. I think I know more about the environment than most people.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. Change is coming, whether you like it or not.
Zerocarbonista. Hello and welcome to Zerocarbonista Series 2, The Manifesto. I'm Ian Collins, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that this is about the only place you'll find a discussion on environmental issues that cuts through the guff, gets to the core of the story, and gives you some pretty straightforward opinion on all matters green. A brief explainer about the DNA of this podcast. The series mostly follows the opinions, initiatives, and ideas of Dale Vince, the entrepreneur and environmentalist. He built his success in the green energy sector. He's the owner of Ecotricity, the world's first green energy company, and also happens to be the chairman of Forest Green Rovers. Dale, hello.
Yeah, morning.
I don't think we could really start anywhere but here.
I can today announce that the UK government has decided to become the world leader in low-cost clean power generation, cheaper than coal, cheaper than gas, and we believe that in 10 years' time, offshore wind will be powering every home in the country, with our target rising from 30 gigawatts to 40 gigawatts. You heard me right. Your kettle, your washing machine, your cooker, your heating, your plug-in electric vehicle, the whole lot of them, will get their juice cleanly and without guilt from the breezes that blow around these islands.
So, he's serious, Dale. He's beaten you at your own game.
Well,
Dale Vince move over, Boris Johnson enter.
Yeah, it's like he's certainly adopting our language. You know, I mean, he described Britain or the UK as potentially the Saudi Arabia of wind energy in his speech. And, you know, this is something we've been saying for decades. We're not alone in saying that. You know, I mean, the UK wind industry has been saying that since the 90s, I reckon, because we've got 40% of Europe's wind energy. You know, it makes us like the Saudi Arabia of wind. So Johnson's on board now, it would appear, though I'm skeptical. And then we have this announcement for offshore wind. And it's worth mentioning that just 7 years ago, the same Boris Johnson said that wind energy couldn't pull the skin off of a rice pudding and that Britain faced an energy crisis to which wind was not the answer.
But then, you see, I'm thinking he's just been listening to this podcast. We've done about 26 episodes of this. It's not unfeasible, Dale, that he's been listening and thought, actually, these guys know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's possible, but I doubt that somewhat. So he's announced this additional offshore target. It's not as big as it sounds. And the idea that we can power all of Britain's homes from offshore wind is fine. You know, of course we can, but we already power all of Britain's homes from onshore and offshore wind and solar. You know, we have nearly 40% of our electricity now from renewable energy. Homes in Britain only use 1/3 of total electricity, so we've already covered homes. And the kind of worrying thing is that the press release they put out and the speech itself gave a lot of prominence to something called floating offshore wind, and the idea that we can go out into really deep waters with this stuff. It's going to cost twice as much as normal offshore wind, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's going to take up about 2% of Johnson's announced new target. So it's kind of a tiny component in terms of impact, but in terms of presentation, it's like the major thing. We're going to pioneer this new thing, you know, floating windmills, which is just bonkers. We don't need it. We're not short of wind. You know, onshore, we have enough land to build enough windmills to power the whole country 4 times over. And that's available land, you know, allowing for all of the constraints, grid, housing, aviation, everything you like, you know, 4 times over just onshore. Then, of course, we've got offshore anyway. So, you know, it's all a bit something and nothing from the government. It's a bit hyped. They've just added 10 gigawatts of offshore to a 30 gigawatt target is essentially what's happened.
So why would they, what do you think's behind that, Dale? Why would Johnson bother to even monkey around with the offshore elements of this, as you rightly say? I mean, the homes are largely covered, but it's a great headline for a prime minister. We will power every home through wind, etc. But as you say, they're kind of already there. What would be his reason for wanting to even introduce the offshore element?
Well, I think it's a presentational thing. It's clear that a lot of people are talking about building back better and building back green and that kind of stuff. There's a real pressure to come back differently out of the pandemic and focus on the green economy. And this is Johnson presenting himself as somebody that's behind that. But of course, what's really lacking is anything for onshore wind and solar, which are our cheapest and most abundant forms of renewable energy, and currently the dominant providers of renewable energy in our country. It makes no sense to ignore them. And this is the kind of flaw in Johnson and the Conservatives' approach. They can't embrace the reality of renewable energy, which is that we need to build it around the country. For them, it's a problem.
What should Boris Johnson have said, Dale, in that speech? What would you, as an environmentalist, you've been doing this for yonks, what would have been that one nugget you'd like to have heard him say that would have been a game changer, that would have made you change your views on his motives behind this?
I would have said adding 10 gigawatts to the offshore target by 2030, that's great, let's have it. But lift the ban on onshore wind, which Cameron imposed. Lift the ban on onshore solar, which Cameron imposed. Let's get back to building onshore. It's cheapest renewable energy we can have. And actually, by 2030, we don't need a target to be 30% renewable energy or whatever. I don't know what he came up with, actually. But we need a target to be 100% renewable energy powered in terms of electricity by 2030. That's absolutely possible. But we've got to get real about it. We've got to bite the bullet and say, we need to build windmills, we need to build solar farms, and we need to build them onshore.
Yeah. Let's go to this story, and here's a clue. Do you know what that is, Dale?
The German national anthem, of course.
Of course it is. We all regularly hum that when we're in happy mood. And the reason we play that is because, of all places, you think of different parts of the world that have an affinity with meat. And for some reason, the German sausage, allowing for the end of peer gaggery that comes from it. The German sausage, it's a part of a staple diet, as we understand. It's almost a tourist attraction in Germany. We understand, however, that Germany now loves vegetarian food.
Yeah, a really interesting survey undertaken in Germany and in France, asking people basically a series of questions to identify how many people are kind of unreconstructed meat eaters, people that don't try to limit the amount of meat they eat. And what they found was that those people are now in the minority in Germany, which is a real surprise. Not yet in France, but in Germany, most people are cutting down on the amount of meat they eat, which is incredible.
So the love affair with the sausage could be over.
Yeah, the worst is over, as the Guardian put it.
That's right. I know. I wish I'd thought of that.
It's pretty good.
Love it. Here's a question from Alex on Twitter. Love what you said about the Liverpool Good Business Festival. I'm now subscribed to the podcast. What's the green flag for? Just enlighten us, Dale. What's he referring to here?
Yeah, we did a little session yesterday. It was one of those online conference festivals things. Gabby Logan was the host. It was kind of based in Liverpool, at least notionally, because, we were all taking part virtually. And we were talking about sport and its role in promoting diversity and, in my case, environment issues. Our flag, the Green Union Jack, it sits behind me when I do these kind of remote studio sessions. Yeah. And it just represents what we're working towards, what we believe in, which is a green Britain. So it's a green version of the Union Jack.
Just remind us as well. Didn't the government try to nick your Green Union Jack about a year ago?
Yeah, they did. Thanks for the memory. So they ran a thing called Green Britain Week, which is itself slightly a rip-off. But then they happened to just use our flag to go with it, and we got in touch and we said, guys, please, you can't do that. Firstly, it's a registered trademark, amongst other things, as part of the fact that we're well known to be users of it. And we fought EDF off in the year of the Olympics. Was it 2012? I think. This is a French nuclear company that draped their vans in our Green Union Jack, and we couldn't believe it.
Can't be doing that.
We had to take them guys to court as well, but the government backed out eventually and settled out of court, so we got our flag back.
You'd think, well, I always think, and maybe I've got too much faith in the enormity of some corporations and governments, you'd think somebody would check that first.
Well, I think they knew, and I think they thought they could just get away with it. I mean, it's ironic because government advice when it comes to intellectual property is to register it, to protect yourself. Thanks, government. We did that.
Yeah. That's precisely, you're following their advice, just in case anyone nicks your thing. They nicked it.
And so we had to take them to court.
Breach their own advice. Shysters.
Marvelous. Whoever would have thought such a thing?
You just mentioned nuclear power there. Carl on Facebook says, why are you so down on nuclear power? Is it because you don't make money from it?
That's harsh.
It's very harsh, isn't it? Come on, Carl. It's early in the morning, mate. I mean, give us some wiggle room at this end. What's the story here? Because it's a controversial area, of course, and some people look at it as a very clean alternative option, but you're not really enamored by those arguments.
Well, I mean, it's not clean, is it? I don't think anybody makes money out of nuclear power, actually. I mean, this is what all of the studies say. Although, of course, the subsidies for nuclear are huge. So, I mean, it's just come up recently, and people pop up now and then. Oh, I think this was Rod Little in The Sun, wasn't it? That's what kicked off this week. He said nuclear was the safest form of energy that we could have. It's like, well, excuse me, you're forgetting Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and the waste that nuclear energy produces, which is toxic for millennia. And we've got no actual way of dealing with it. He's forgetting all of that stuff. And then he says, it may cost a few quid, but it's worth it. And it's like, well, excuse me, Hinkley is £23 billion. It's over budget and over time. And it's the most expensive energy project ever built. The electricity from it will cost 3 times the wholesale market price. And so there's nothing cheap or safe or clean about nuclear energy. Yeah,
even when Rod Little says it.
Rod Little was basically criticizing Johnson for supporting offshore wind and saying that, offshore wind was expensive and it never works, that it can't make a serious contribution to our energy needs. And so I wrote a little Facebook piece to fact check that and say, by the way, Rod, we've got 40% of our energy today from renewables. Did you know? Did you not know? And that, it's exasperating, actually, that this old myth of wind energy not working would just pop up again. But it was the sun, so I guess we shouldn't.
Well, yeah, but some people think Rod Little is the doyen of environmental issues. Others just think he's a massive twat. So you kind of, you take your side on these things, Dale.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Let's move to. I think we should have a musical interlude. Here we go. It's a massive attack. Rob Dalnica, who is joining Forest Green Rovers. What's going on?
So, we've been talking for just over a year. It began with a conversation about a gig they were planning in Liverpool, a zero carbon gig, which is a fantastic plan. And, we've been talking ever since. And one day he just said recently, he'd like to do a Hector Bayerine and become a shareholder of Forest Green and become a part of the family. And I thought that was fabulous. And I said, well, why don't you join us actually, in a role, and had the idea of artistic director because, he's a very creative, artistic kind of guy. That's a background he has. It's new to us. I think it's new to football. I don't think any football club in the world has ever had an artistic director. And I just think that, there's something that we will find there when we explore that together. There's something good that's going to come from that.
You did get some stick over this, didn't you? I mean, there were some people that said, you are demasculizing football.
Oh, not over this story. I haven't heard that, Ian. I've heard it before, but not over this story.
Well, I think the word artistic director, maybe it just needs explaining. I think you just did, really. But, as you say, this has never been done before.
Yeah, my explanation is we don't know what it means or entails. We have a sense of what it means, obviously, but we don't know where it's going to go and what's going to come from it. But that's part of the excitement for me. It's new territory. And I think that there's a likely good overlap between the world of arts and creativity and football, particularly in fan engagement. Let's say, for example, Rob is a big football fan, and he thinks there's a disengagement issue with football. I can see that. And he's going to bring his creativity to the club, which I think is just going to be awesome. Let's see where it goes. But, when we began this 10 years ago, bringing the environment into football, plenty of people said, you can't do that. That won't work. This kind of stuff. That was new territory. We'll see. This will work.
I quite like the idea. You have the Barmy Army that follow cricket around and the like. Could you not, every time there's a goal at the ground, massive attack, just leap in and knock out a few bars?
Well, actually, one of the first things we were looking at is a sound system, because we played some Massive Attack a few games ago when him and the guys came up, and he was like, oh my God, that's awful. It's made for much better speakers than that, more bass and that kind of stuff. So one of the first projects we're looking at is to change the sound system in the ground. And we're looking at spatial sound. It's quite exciting. We've just hooked up with some major manufacturers just this week that are keen to supply some kit and stuff. And I think Rob's going to do some mixing, and there's going to be something very special up at the ground soon. Unfortunately, there won't be a lot of fans there to hear it, but we do what we can.
That's the thing, isn't it? A top-notch band, any kind of musical outfit, they know a sound system when they hear one. So if anything's a bit iffy or a bit moody, then they're on it.
No, totally. And, I think it's an area for potential massive improvement, particularly at our ground. But I think in football in general, I think sound systems don't get a lot of attention. You just get tannoys, really.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not designed to play music. They don't even do voices very well.
Yeah. I'm kind of slightly surprised that no one's been onto that a little more. When you think of sort of digital boards and sound and everything that is, sort of central to a good experience, you'd think more grounds would be.
I think it's been overlooked, but we're going to bring it in.
Here's a story about Facebook. I'm fascinated by these kind of posts, but there's a really serious side to this. So adverts on Facebook denying the reality of climate crisis or the need for action were viewed by at least 8 million people in the US in the first half of 2020, according to a disinformation think tank that have been looking into this. And this is really serious stuff, isn't it? Because it's all very well saying, well, Facebook, we're onto it. We can get rid of these things. And don't worry, we took them down once we know. But of course, the lie, as they say, is halfway around the world before the truth has even put its boots on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think Facebook need to do more. I don't think they really try hard enough at all. They talk about wanting to avoid censorship and stuff like that. But there's a point at which you've got to step in and say, this isn't censorship when you're taking out untruth and falsehood, newspapers do it. They have a code. Even though we just talked about The Sun and Rod Liddell, that was an opinion piece. And that's there's a lot more leeway in an opinion piece. Let's say.
Of course, yeah. No one's talking about getting rid of that. We can just all disagree with it. But when something is just there as a kind of almost a definitive news piece, that's serious territory.
Yeah, that's a problem. It misrepresents, it misleads people. It's not just Facebook, but I think Facebook are probably behind the curve in terms of taking responsibility for this.
Here's a question from Mark on Twitter. We kind of just touched on this. I should have just mentioned this earlier, really. Dale, can you get Massive Attack to play the new lawn next summer? Go on, he says.
Yeah, well, it might be possible because one of the early conversations around what could happen is a gig at the new lawn. So, watch this space. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Let's move on to Prince William, because it's a nice story, this. Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, has launched a £50 million global environmental prize to help convert climate change doom-mongering into the optimism he believes can save the planet. I'm guessing there's only positives in this story, Dale. Sometimes you need big figures like a duke or a prince to advance these things, regardless of where one stands on the wider issue of royalty.
Yeah. Well, look, I would say I read some stuff in the news about this, and I think it's nice to talk about optimism. I think it's naive to think that we can solve any crisis with optimism. This is Johnson's approach. He just brings optimism to Brexit or to anything and says, don't worry, it'll be all right. That doesn't solve the problem. I don't want to knock the scheme, but I just want to say that I don't think optimism is the answer. I think we have to be pragmatic and realistic, and we have to, break eggs to make this omelette, really. Like we need onshore wind, for example, which most people want, but the government and most Tory MPs don't. So, we've got to kind of push boundaries and kind of slap ourselves out of this kind of stupor that we're in. The climate crisis is a big deal. And we've got to do some uncomfortable things to sort it out. So the Earthshot, I like the name of it because it's
good name.
It's much more appropriate than the Moonshot. Do you know what I mean? It is the Earth that we need
what's
to
happened?
fix.
Just gone very quiet, isn't it? The Moonshot.
Well, they deny it now. I think Johnson has denied that there is a Moonshot program or £100 billion plan behind it. He's just it's disavowed now.
Yeah. Despite his government pretty much announcing it the week before. So with this, the Earthshot Prize, it's going to reward £1 million to 5 winning innovators each year from now until 2030. So the public needs a bit of hope, a bit of positivity that deep challenges facing the environment can be solved. As you say, enthusiasm alone, positivity alone isn't going to make it happen. But it's a small part of the jigsaw, but maybe a welcome one.
Yeah, I've got no problem with the contribution in that respect. I think everything that we need to do to solve this crisis, we know what it is. It is about energy, transport, and food. It's about changing how we live, how we power ourselves, how we travel, and what we eat. All of the technology we need to do that is there or coming very soon. In the case of electric airplanes, for example, everything else is there already. We just have to change how we live. It's as simple as that. And that's what we need to grasp, really. We need government policies that stop the prejudice in favor of fossil fuels and the old bad ways of doing things, factory farming, that kind of stuff. We need to change policy to promote the good stuff. We need to change regulations to preclude the bad stuff, to make it illegal. And we need to change the subsidy scheme, the support that comes from government through taxes and subsidies, to promote the good stuff. It's very simple for us to do this. We just got to point our economy and the way we live in a different direction.
Fair point. And I thought we got away with it, but clearly not. There you go. Now the book bugle is back for this episode. The reason I mentioned this, Toby on email, he emailed zerocarbonista@ecotricity.co.uk. Says, I've pre-ordered the book. Are you doing any online events for the launch? I'd also love to see a video version of the podcast. And it's about the second person that's mentioned.
Yeah, that's nice. We're looking into it, aren't we? Videoing one of these podcasts, Mike Graham style. That could be a bit of fun. But Book Bugle, it was well timed, because what I just said about what we need to do to deal with this crisis, change how we live, what government needs to do. There's a role for business as well, and there's a role for people. All of that, chapter 13 of the book.
Good work. Out very soon. You can pre-order, of course. That's it for this episode. Goes rather quickly. That was a beauty, Dale. Have a great week, and we'll speak next week.
Thanks, Ian.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget, of course, you can subscribe for free from your podcast provider so that you get each new episode automatically. Leave a review too. If you want to get in touch, you can email your comments and questions to zerocarbonista@ecotricity.co.uk. Really important bit. Make sure you follow Dale on social media. That's twitter.com/DaleVince or facebook.com/DaleVince. We'll see you next week.
Zero Carbon East.